Committee meeting to order. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Director Anderson. Director Buchanan.
Here.
Director Colson.
Here.
Director DeWitt.
Here.
Director Lewis.
Here.
Director Troiani. Director McGallis.
Here.
We have a quorum of 5 present with 2 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Fraga, Fuentes, Hobson, Pang, Ross, Totten, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you. If we could have just a moment of silence and for the folks in San Bernardino for the losses that they've had. Thank you. Today's meeting is an opportunity for the Board and Finance Committee to hear the various service boards' presentations as to what their budgets include, what innovative ideas they have for the upcoming year, and a projection of their capital throughout the next few years. So it's an opportunity for us to ask questions, to get feedback from them. Today's meeting is not a meeting where we will be taking any action. That'll be done at our December 17th meeting by the full board at that particular meeting. So with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Bea, who will introduce the order that we're going to go through the hearing.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Director McGallis, Finance Committee members. So annually, right before the December meeting where you actually do take a vote on the regional budget, the 3 service boards are kind enough to come in, as well as their executive directors, to do a presentation on their regional budget. You will recall last month we presented the RTA agency budget. So this is an opportunity to hear from each of the 3 service boards. Once again, we prepared, as you know, a business plan call in the spring of 2015. All of the service boards have fully complied with the information requested and some follow-up items as well. It was a very collaborative process. I mean, they know their business best, and so we're here to support them and to work with them and make sure that we have the information that you need in order to successfully pass the budget in December. So we wanted to start with PACE. Our executive director, TJ Ross, is here, as well as Terry Brennan, who is the CFO. And then we'll move through and hear from Metra and then the CTA as well. So with no further ado, they actually prepared presentations, and we'll get started with Director Ross and our CFO, Terry Brennan. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Roman. I didn't see Roman there as well.
Okay. Good morning. My name is TJ Ross. I'm the Executive Director at PACE. And very quickly, I want to just turn this over to Terry Brannon to begin the presentation on our 2016 capital and operating budget.
Good morning, Chairman Dillard, Chairman McGallis, members of the RTA Board. Thank you for the opportunity to allow us to present our 2016 budget to you this morning. Before I start on a presentation, I just wanted to acknowledge the cooperation and support that we've received from the RTA. Bea and her team were great about getting the budget information into our hands early. We started in May planning this process, and for the second year in a row, we had unprecedented cooperation. And that really makes our lives easier at the service board side, knowing early what our numbers are going to be for the coming year. It really takes a lot of the angst out of the budget process. I've been doing this, I counted it last night, this is my 37th RTA budget, and the last 2 have been the best, so in terms of cooperation and work. So just with that, I'll jump into our budget. As you know, PACE is responsible for both the Suburban Services Program and the ADA, and I have a budget presentation that will cover both elements, the Suburban and the ADA. We'll start with the Suburban. What am I doing wrong here? Yeah, right click's not clicking. Okay. Page down isn't working. Here we go. Okay, Starting with our suburban services budget. Overall, the outlook's very positive for our suburban budget program for 2016. Some of the highlights that I'd like to talk about. First of all, our budget is balanced to the RTA marks and the criteria established in the Act. We're also looking at favorable budget results for 2015. I'll cover some of that on an upcoming slide. A key item for 2016, our cash fares will be increasing to $2 for full fare, $1 for reduced. They're currently $1.75 and $85 respectively. The thought behind that is we want to move more of our customers into Ventra. So Ventra fares will remain flat at $1.75 and 85 cents for reduced. In addition, we have a number of new services that we're implementing this year and next year, which will contribute to ridership growth in 2016. We estimate at 1.6%. Looking at some of our numbers, first just to take a quick look at 2015, if you will, the performance for this year. Our operating revenue is running unfavorable to budget by $2.3 million. That's mostly due to the fall off in state half-fare reimbursement and also a loss that PACE is experiencing in its advertising revenue. Our advertising revenue contract, we had an old 5-year contract that started before the ad market collapsed, actually, with the recession. That contract ran out. The new contract is bringing in less revenue, so that contributed to this revenue loss in 2015. The good news is that on the expense side, operating expenses are running $9.1 million favorable, and the bulk of that, probably $8.2 million of that, is due to fuel. Fuel prices, as you've seen at the pump, have collapsed. Our diesel prices have collapsed. Our current price this week for ultra-low sulfur number 2 is $1.35 a gallon. So we're reaping some significant savings this year on fuel, and that's contributing to a healthy bottom line this year. In addition, public funding, sales tax is running slightly favorable by $1.5 million, and we have some additional grant money coming in from a JARC grant for our I-55 service. So overall, we're looking at about a $9.4 million favorable result this year. Looking at 2016 on the revenue side, revenue is growing by 4.1%. A lot of that's due to the ridership growth, a little bit due to the fare change for the cash riders. And we're assuming next year that the half-fare reimbursement from the state will be at its typical full level. So that contributes to the 4.1% on the revenue growth. On the expense side, we're looking at 7.1%. In terms of expense growth, we realize that that's a large growth number, and just to break it down for you at a high level, core inflation is projected at 2% for next year. So the remainder, the 5%, is split about 50-50 between the service expansion that's taking place this year and next year, and then some new core initiatives that we're putting into the system for next year. A couple of things that we're doing, we're putting Wi-Fi on all of our buses for next year. We're starting that program next year. And in addition to that, we're going to be refreshing our Oracle ERP system for next year. PACE is one of the first governmental agencies in the country to go live with Oracle 12 back in 2008, and it's an integrated ERP. It's been in place now for 7 years. We had Oracle out this year to do an assessment of how we're looking in accordance with best practices and their recommendations for what we need to do to move forward. And we've programmed $2 million to refresh that system in 2016. Bottom line public funding number of $166.8 million is balanced to the RTA funding level for next year, and we're achieving the 30% recovery ratio. A quick look at our ridership. Ridership for this year is not doing as well as expected. Fixed route ridership is down 4.2%. Several factors contributing to that. The weather, February of 15 was a particularly bad month. In addition, the low fuel prices have people driving more. And in addition to that, there was a change in 2014 with how we handle cash transfers when we converted to Ventra. That lost us a little bit of ridership into 15. Looking at fixed route ridership for 16, the 1.6% is largely being driven by the service improvements that we're making. We're projecting base ridership to be flat at 0, and the 1.6 is accountable for all of that growth. Dial-A-Ride, the Dial-A-Ride program is holding its own. We're looking at essentially flat ridership this year, and we're projecting growth for next year, 1.3%. The Van Pool program took a little bit of a dip this year, again affected by fuel prices, and for next year we're projecting 2.6% growth based on the addition of 19 additional vans. Will be up to 726 vans in the van pool program in 2016. Turning to the ADA budget, ADA is also looking very positive. The 2015 ridership is expected to grow by 5.5%. We project to finish 2015 $9.3 million favorable to budget. The new contracts that we have in place for ADA contain performance metrics that the contractors have to achieve. If they don't achieve them, they're assessed penalties. Those penalties are contributing to this $9.3 million favorable result in 2015. The good thing about this is that the $9.3 million is not lost. It's retained in the RTA ADA fund, and it's available for future contingencies if we have a problem with funding the program. Ridership growth forecast for next year is 5.1%. It's typical of the ADA program. It's been growing at about 5% annually. And RTA funding of $160 million for next year does count on the $8.5 million from the state. The state subsidizes the program each year. We did receive the subsidy this year, and we're expecting that we'll get it next year, state budget issues aside. With regard to the ridership growth forecast for next year, our past ridership growth has been averaging about 6%, 6.2%. So this is a conservative figure for next year. Just looking at some of the details in terms of the budget performance this year, revenue's running right on target of $14 million. The expenses I mentioned are running favorable, largely due to these performance metrics in the budget. And total funding, this is the good news, the $9.3 million stays with the system. It's held by the RTA and the fund. The other good news aspect of this is since 2015 is coming in favorable, we reduced our 2016 projection by about $10 million. The plan, the old RTA plan, had the ADA being funded at $170 million next year for 16. Now we're at $160 million. So that $10 million was freed up and then was put through the formula and split up to CTA, Metro, and PACE. So it resulted in additional funding to the three service boards. For next year, the ADA expense growth, 7.2%, is driven by contract price increases of about 2.2%, 2.1%, and the ridership growth of 5.1%. So there's nothing really remarkable there on the ADA side. Just a little bit more of a breakdown on the ridership. City ADA is projected to grow at 5%. Suburban ADA is growing at 5.9%. The taxi access program remains flat at around 60,000 riders. So overall, we're looking at 5.1% growth for next year. Taking a look at the Suburban Services Capital Program, there is no program for the ADA, but there is for the Suburban Capital side. I tried to summarize our capital program on one slide. It's much smaller than CTA's and Metro's. Our total program reaches $47.6 million. Most of it goes to rolling stock. We're replacing 75 fixed route buses. That includes 72 regular 40-foot coaches, 3 over-the-road type coaches that will be used on express service, 38 paratransit vehicles, and about a dozen engine transmission retrofits. The rest of the program is dedicated toward equipment. A notable item under the electrical, signal, and communications category, the IBS equipment at $1.6 million is funded by RTA ICE funds. We're replacing our intelligent bus system. It's 14 years old. That's the system that tells us where the buses are in real time. It communicates to our dispatch locations throughout the region. It's old, it's in need of replacement, and we're looking forward to using the RTA ICE funds to update that system. The next item under there worth mentioning, the TSP equipment will be putting in a communications network, and this is being funded by the RTA through the TSP grant that the RTA has for the region. And that'll allow us to put TSP communications network in on 10 major corridors, over 100 miles of corridor improvements. The rest of the items in the program are largely just support equipment, vehicles, trucks, tow trucks, cars, things of that nature. Another important thing worth mentioning, and it came up in a question, was with regard to bus stop shelters and signs. This is one of the key factors that came up in the customer satisfaction index. Suburban waiting conditions for transit are not good at all. We've been undertaking a multi-year program to get more shelters out in the suburbs, and that $2.2 million there will allow us to put in another 150 sheltered locations throughout the region. Just to sort of take a look at our program in terms of how we're spending our money, this is typical for PACE. 80% of our money is going toward rolling stock, and the rest of it is for the facilities and equipment that I mentioned. Just some of the highlights of things that are going on right now. We're taking delivery of the first 20 CNG fuel transit coaches. Those will be assigned to our South Division garage. Unfortunately, due to the state funding situation, the remaining 71 had to be put on hold. We had to tell the vendor to sort of stop production on those until that money is assured that it will flow to us. The South Division CNG construction, last year I think I showed you pictures of somebody else's CNG project. This is actually ours. It's under construction. This is the fueling equipment, the generator, the compressors, the dryer, the storage cubes. It's all being piped right now, and we assume right now, based on the schedule, that by the end of February we'll be able to fuel our 20 buses that we have. Another project underway for PACE, we're rebuilding the Elgin Transportation Center. It's an old facility. It was actually built by the RTA before PACE's time. It's in need of overhaul. We're redoing the bus driveways, and we're redoing the passenger terminal waiting area. We're expanding our park and ride lots. The Bolingbrook Park and Ride is the old Chicago lot. We're expanding that, adding another 71 cars of parking. That'll take it up to 219 cars that will be able to park there. Then the lot is full every day. Some of the projects that we have coming up in 2016 in terms of construction, we're going to be building the 2 park and rides on I-90 for the I-90 Express service, one at Randall Road, one at Barrington. There's a third one scheduled for 2017. That's at Route 25. We're going to be rebuilding the Heritage Garage, which is in Joliet. That's a midlife. And in Evanston, we're going to be expanding the outside parking capability of the garage to add parking for 60 vehicles. That will be outdoor parking for buses. And South Holland is our sort of acceptance and maintenance facility. We're in the process of replacing that as well. Just a little graphic on the I-90 corridor to give you a sense. From the CTA Blue Line out to Randall Road, we'll be running express service, and we'll be building those 3 park and rides. Randall Road will go in 2016. Barrington will go in 2016. And this is Terry playing with PowerPoint. Route 25 will go in 2017. You see how they get bigger and it connects to the CTA Blue Line. There's a number of new routes. There'll be 4 new express routes going in. An expansion on the 2 existing express routes that we have in that market. And there also will be in the local areas call and ride routes that will connect to the parking and the transit pickup points at those locations. On a sort of a down note, our biggest problem that we face in terms of capital is our ability to replace our rolling stock. As you saw in the earlier chart, it's 80% of what we do, and there's not enough money to replace all the vehicles. Over the next 5 years, we've got a $216 million shortfall in terms of vehicle needs. It's a sizable problem for PACE. It's strategically one of our biggest problems. And if we don't have additional capital to replace these vehicles, it's going to increase our operating cost, and it could impact our service reliability as vehicles are older and have more maintenance issues. So with that, that's essentially our presentation in a nutshell, and we'd be glad to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much. It was very informative, and we certainly want to thank PACE, TJ, and staff and the board for submitting a budget that did address the budget marks that our board had passed, which makes our review a lot easier and smoother. So I thank you for doing that, and for our staff being able to work with you. I just have a couple of questions, and we'll open it up for the other members as well. On the budget as presented, are there any collective bargaining agreements up this year that will affect this budget?
Yes. We currently have 1 open agreement right now. Of our 9, We have one open, and we have two that expire on 12/31. So as we go into 16, we will have 3 open agreements.
Okay. And when do you normally open that and start that discussion and try to resolve the,
Well, it seems like it never ends. I think by the time they finish one contract, they start talking about the next one. I don't know if TJ, if you've got I don't think there's a particular schedule for that. We've been in negotiations with the ones that are coming up on 12/31, and the one that's expired, I believe that's South Division. It's been expired for over, what, 3 years? Yeah.
Okay.
They kind of drag on.
so this budget takes that matter into consideration?
Yes, we make a working assumption as to what the settlement will be, and then we make an accrual for the cost as we go along, and then when we actually settle, we go back and reverse the accruals.
Okay. The other comment I would like to just make sure that we have an understanding on, every year we've talked about reserve funds and whether the RTA should have reserve funds or how we should approach that. This year, the approach has been that the RTA, if it's passed at our meeting on December 17th, will no longer attempt to maintain a 5% reserve fund. So the budgets that you're submitting to us today are submitted with the understanding that for shortfalls that might occur, that you will make those shortfalls up within your budget. Is that understood?
Correct. We have a board policy at PACE that we will maintain a 8% reserve. 8% of our annual operating budget, about 1 month, 30 days
Great.
reserve, and we have that.
You're right. Then with that, I'd like to open it up to the other members. Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions, maybe kind of piggybacking on what the chairman was saying. You alluded to it, but given some of the budget uncertainty, do you have a contingency plan for what you might do if, in fact, we have a change in Springfield?
Well, on the 2 areas where we're relying on direct funding from Springfield, one is the half-fare funding in the suburban budget, and the other is the $8.5 million in the ADA budget. With regard to the suburban budget on the half-fare, I think we're going to have to just watch the situation carefully and see how expenses and revenues are going next year and whether or not that money comes through. And I keep in mind that the half-fare reimbursement is based on the state fiscal year, which is out of sync with our fiscal year. So if there's no half-fare funding in state fiscal year 2016, maybe it'll come back for state fiscal year 17, which would at least get us half a year funding in the latter half of our fiscal 16. So there's potential for that as well. On the $8.5 million for the ADA program, our chairman has indicated that we may have to take a look at the ADA fare if the state doesn't step up with the $8.5 million. So that's something that we'll have to revisit during the year. Okay. We did receive that $8.5 million, though, for this year.
Ms. Comfort. Thank you. You alluded to prices of gasoline. Were natural gas prices also reduced?
Yeah, natural gas is down to pretty all-time low. The last report I saw, we were at like 28 cents a therm. Okay. So it's really cheap. We typically budget in the 40s per therm, and gas prices are down.
So that accrues to that reserve you referred to earlier?
Yes, utilities will run favorable for this year, fuel and nat gas.
My last question is, you referred to a process where for contract review, and I guess this was in the ADA paratransit area, you look at contract performance, and if someone is either above or below, you begin to take some actions.
Right.
Does that only apply to the ADA paratransit area or to all aspects of contract performance relative to the PACE organization?
On the fixed, the ADA side has much more specific and rigid performance standards. There's 3 general categories. There's on-time performance. There's also missed trips if the contractor, and then there's productivity as measured by trips per hour. So a failure in any one of those to meet our minimum thresholds results in assessed damages. On the fixed route side, the penalties are more geared toward, we have a number of fixed route services that are privately contracted. There, the penalty tends to run if they miss a trip. If they actually miss a pullout for a specific trip, they're penalized for missing that trip.
So I guess what you're saying is there are penalties on both sides, just configured differently.
Yes,
okay,
exactly,
thank you.
exactly.
Director Lewis, on the, what you pointed out as far as the ADA funding and the funding for the fare reimbursement, it's over $11 million. That, you're right on. That is a big concern that we would have as a board if you had to make that kind of an adjustment. Next questions. Yes, Director Frega.
I'd like to compliment you on getting vehicles that are friendly environmental motor systems that you've ordered. What is the projection for the coming purchase of vehicles? Do you intend to keep going with
The next big CNG procurement would be associated with the Northwest Cook Garage project. We're still trying to site a new garage for Northwest Cook County. When we do, that garage will be a CNG facility from the start, and the vehicles that are operating out of there will be CNG based. Probably will be about 140, 150 vehicles.
Thank you very much.
Director DeWitt.
A couple quick questions. Is Wi-Fi service included in the suburban bus service program as well?
Yes.
Okay, so it'll be the entire system.
Yes, we're going to start implement. It won't be fully implemented in 16, but the programs. We already have a pilot program running on the I-55 service. It's very well received, and we're going to be expanding that. And it'll start in 16. We should wrap it up by 17.
Very good. And then I assume by your comments regarding ADA discount funding, there's no relief in sight with any action recently taken in Springfield regarding some revenues starting to.
Not that we've heard. We did receive the second installment on the $8.5 million for state fiscal year 2015. We did just receive that, I believe, in October.
And in conjunction with that, federal action taken, I think, this week on transportation. Any ropes being thrown from that side with regards to?
From what we know of the bill, the good news there is we'll have
It's
about
coming.
a 10% increase in capital funding, which will be fantastic.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Bus shelters. Have you looked at the city of Chicago or the CTA with their JD Decoy, or however you pronounce it, privatization of their bus shelters has been a huge success story. Have you looked at maybe privatizing, or what do you
We do have a private ad shelter program, and our program is pretty. We think it's pretty unique and innovative, and it's quite old. We've been doing it for about 15 years now, where the ad revenue generated by the shelter, we share that with the community as an incentive for the community to accept the shelters and the advertising. The problem that we've faced, unlike the city of Chicago, is we've got 260 municipalities with village boards that have different views on bus shelters and especially advertising bus shelters. So we haven't had the market penetration for the ad shelters, and we've even had some communities reject our standard shelter, that they didn't want them on their streetscapes. So it's been a challenge, but we have had a long-standing privatization effort there.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Director Hobson.
Yeah, I have a few questions. One of those, and thank you for a great and thorough presentation. I appreciate that very much. One of the assumptions was regarding ridership increases at pace. I look at the national trends. The national trends are down for ridership. I look at our own data. Our own data shows decreasing ridership, particularly on bus, for the last couple of years. With 2016 projecting continued low fuel prices, that would seem to be counter to increased bus ridership. What kind of assumptions did you use to come up with increased bus ridership for 2016?
You're right. Bus ridership is down nationally and locally. When I was looking at the figures, the CTA and PACE since 2012 to 15, bus is down 5%. In terms of our assumptions going forward, the reason why we're projecting an increase is that it's primarily based on the new services that we're implementing this year and next year. That's contributing to the ridership growth.
Is that specifically bus on shoulder, or are there other?
No, it's across the board. There's a host of service improvements that are being put in response to the customer satisfaction index. We're working on a lot of service improvements to improve our on-time performance, which was a high customer priority. We're expecting that those improvements will contribute to the ridership growth. As far as the losses, one of the factors that we experienced was when we eliminated the cash transfer because of the Ventra conversion. There was no ability to issue a cash transfer any longer. We took that hit in July of 14. That's now in the base, so we don't see that contributing to any further losses. So we're essentially saying ridership will be flat, and then with the new services, that will contribute to the growth.
Great, thank you for that. You mentioned this customer satisfaction survey. I did want to loop in and tie to that, and close the loop essentially. We had a customer satisfaction survey presented to us a few months ago, and you alluded to it when you were speaking to your capital improvements, but I was wondering if you might expand on what actions specifically PACE is taking to improve customer satisfaction and address some of the concerns that were raised in the previous survey.
I think the two big efforts right now are on the capital side, the shelters. That's a basic one. And on the operating side, the on-time performance that's being addressed through the service improvements. Those are the two big levers that we're pushing.
Okay. Another item is in the spirit of cooperation, which has been great between the service boards and the RTA the last couple of years that you mentioned. Can we take a look at some sort of fuel cooperative? I looked at the fuel price projections. CTA was projecting $2.15. Metro was projecting $2.23, and PACE was projecting $2.53. I think you should all go and buy fuel from the CTA. Is there any way that we can get some sort of a cooperative between the three service boards where we could perhaps have some common expert that can participate in fuel hedging or efforts like that?
This question comes up every year.
But we have a new spirit of cooperation, so that's why I'm re-raising it.
In that spirit of cooperation, I would offer to buy fuel for CTA and Metro because I believe we're paying the lowest price this year.
But you forecast the highest price.
We're forecasting higher, but we're not paying it. We're paying low. And it's always better to come in favorable to budget on fuel than to come in over budget. Fuel prices, as you know, are very volatile. The projection that we did for fuel for 16 was prepared back in June. If we were to redo the 16 projection for fuel right now, yeah, I would go with a lower number. But it's not what we budget because we don't undertake the strategy of trying to protect our budget with a hedge. Because when you try to protect your budget with a hedge, you could wind up on the wrong side of that bargain and essentially overpay for fuel. The Transit Cooperative Research Board did a study on fuel hedging in public transit, and in 9 out of the 10 case studies for transit hedging on fuel, 9 systems lost substantial amounts of money on their fuel hedges. And what that reinforced to me and our team at PACE is that you're not going to outguess the market on fuel, and you're better off paying market prices and dealing with the volatility of the market than trying to hedge on fuel. Because if you hedge and you lose, you're essentially throwing taxpayer dollars away. Yes, you protected your budget, and yes, you could say I budgeted for $3 a gallon and I paid $3 a gallon, but then you wind up in a situation like we're in this year where we're paying $1.35. And I'm not sure what Metro and CTA are paying right now, but my guess is it's probably more.
Well, that's an excellent data point. But do you think there's any economies by looping in CTA and Metro?
Now, in terms of the economy of scale, once you get to about the scale that we're at, there's no further economies. And actually, you run into increased costs because the fuel suppliers tend to not be able to service all of the locations economically. And the CTA, Metro, and PACE use different fuel blends at different times of the year. So that adds another layer of complexity to the whole fuel procurement. I actually think at the volumes that we're buying at, we're getting market economies. The prices that we're paying at PACE, we're paying based on a weekly index, OPIS, the Oil Price Information Service, plus a margin for delivery and profit. Our margin for delivery and profit is 1.1 cents per gallon. It's pretty thin.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to do much better than that.
And Director Hobson, before your time on the board, we spent quite a large amount of time, all four agencies, looking at this very specific issue. You know, what were the opportunities? And everything Terry just said was echoed and discovered in that analysis that we did several years back. Probably, 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now we did all that as well, and backed up by other national analysis and other work that we're doing, and the history. So, you know, I think we're all very comfortable with the approach that everyone's taking and can stand by those decisions made.
Well, I appreciate the review for the newbie here on the board, so thank you for that. And my final question, much to everybody's relief, is regarding projected trending costs per passenger trip versus fare revenue per passenger trip. And this is something that, thank you, be prepared for me. And if we look at just pace on the cost growth, projecting between 2014 and 2018 a 4.6% operating cost increase, when we compare that to revenues, there's going to be a 1.2% revenue increase over that same period of time. In other words, we have an increasing gap over a period of time between costs and revenue. Do you have some way that you're protecting for this? Because that's a long-term recipe for disaster.
That tends to be the standard for transit. Costs grow faster than revenues in ridership, and that's why we're publicly subsidized. But what we do is, on a regular basis, as we evaluate our fares, and we do a fare increase, it tends to be more of a step where we get back into alignment. So there may be a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 years without a fare increase where that ratio drifts apart. Then there's a fare increase, restores it back to an equilibrium, and then tends to drift again. If you look at the historical rate of fare increases over time going back to the 80s, you find they kind of kept pace with inflation pretty much overall.
So the data that I have that doesn't
accurate.
show that keeping track,
there's no fare increase.
There's an out-year fare increase that hasn't been.
It's not factored in.
It's not factored
Right.
in, but
once it happens, you'll see a reset, if you will, on the relationship between those ratios.
Now, one of the things that we've discovered is customers seem to be more accepting of small increases, small regular increases, as opposed to big giant increases. There's generally outrage and a lot of complaining that goes on with these large
Right.
step functions
Right.
that you've just described. How does that factor into your thinking? It sounds like you're still in the large price increase mode.
Well, it does factor into our thinking in terms of what we've experienced. If you look backwards, with the implementation of the Ventra system, we actually did have a substantial increase, Pace did, in its average revenue per rider. If you go back to prior to Ventra, our average revenue per passenger was closer to $1 for the fixed route side. Now it's pushing $1.19. It's close. We're very much in sync, actually, with the CTA's average revenue per trip at Pace. So we had sort of the benefit of a fare increase without actually increasing fares. We've been taking in more revenue per passenger. So from a time continuum basis, we brought ourselves up to snuff, if you will, just recently with the implementation of Ventra. Now, going forward, in the past, transit has typically not done fare increases in small, marginal, it's hard to get pennies or nickels on a bus. But now with the new system, with the Ventra system, we have more flexibility in how we price to market. And really, I don't think that the system has yet, gotten its arms around what the potential is for Ventra pricing now that we have the new technology. And it's something that I think we all need to look at.
So that is something that's under analysis at Pace?
Not actively right now, but it's something that we will have to look at in conjunction with Metra and CTA to see what's the art of the possible now that we have this new technology out there.
Great. Thank you. That concludes my questions.
Director Colson.
This $47 million in capital, that's being paid for out of your fare box and tax receipts, right?
It's largely federal money.
Okay.
The biggest pieces of that are federal PACE fund balance funds and some RTA pass-through for CMAQ funds.
Okay, and you don't do any borrowing, you don't have any debt service?
We do for the South CNG project. That was a PACE bond-funded project, $12 million. That was in the prior year program.
12 million, that's the extent of the debt?
Right now.
All right.
We have $100 million in bonding authority for 4 specific projects: the South CNG, a Northwest Cook Garage, a DuPage Garage, and the Evanston parking expansion. Thus far, we've only issued the 12 for the South CNG project, which is under construction.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Director Totten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to your ridership, have you incorporated yet any projections on what the improvements on the I-90 corridor will do to ridership? I'm assuming it's a plus or we wouldn't be spending all this money, but you're also going to have to change a lot of routes, I imagine, as well when you start this up.
Right. The I-90 service really doesn't start operating until 17.
17.
So it's in the out year, but it's not impacting 16 ridership projections.
Have you done any projections on
Yes.
17?
Yes, there's ridership projections for I-90 in the business plan. I believe they're incorporated into our 3-year plan projections.
So you're telling me you are anticipating an increase in
Yes,
ridership?
yes.
Even though you're probably going to have to adjust other routes that will no longer exist, maybe?
There's no route plan for termination due to the I-90. It's all new service, all net addition, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, one last question I have, and you've heard a lot of interest as far as from this board about your budget. What do you see as being the greatest challenge you're going to have in being able to achieve the budget you submitted?
Good question. I would say I don't see any significant challenges other than the state not coming through with their end of the bargain on the 8.5 for paratransit and the 2.3 that we need. I think if the state doesn't come through on the half fare, that's going to impact the whole region. We're the smallest piece of that pie. It's really going to hit the CTA hard. So I think that's probably the biggest threat we face for next year is state funding.
It's certainly the one major item that you can't control. And
Right.
it's a big
Right.
item, especially as you mentioned in ADA.
Right.
TJ, you had a comment?
I think, just reiterate the lack of capital funding from the state. The South Garage has 91 buses that are ready to be retired right now, and we only had funding for 20, and they held back the funding for the other 71. That's the CNG project. That is a problem, and it's a fairy tale without a happy ending. The lack of capital funding in the region, just, you can't make up for that. Old buses just do not do well, and that I see as a big problem from that standpoint of the state not funding those 71 buses for that garage.
Thank you. I think that's good information as we work with our legislators through our chairman and your chairman and boards. Certainly keep that in mind that this budget is subject to a lot of things that we can't control, but things that we will have to readdress if they're not lived up to by the state, whether it be the 8.5 million, the 3 million, or whatever it is for the fare reimbursement. So it's a budget that we hope to pass December 17th, and we still won't have any information, I would doubt, as to the likelihood of continued funding. So we have to assume that funding will be there. That's the assumption that you've made and the one that we're going to be asked to make on December 17th. So I thank you very much for your time and
Thank
for the
you.
great presentation.
Thank you.
Dee, you want to introduce the next?
Yes, now we will have Metro. We have Tom Farmer, their CFO, Executive Director Don Orsino, Lynette Civarelli, and John Milano.
Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here today. I want to be able to present our 2016 budget program for you. In 2016, the budget was less than a 2015 budget with no changes in service levels. Originally projected a 5% increase in fare revenue for 2016, including 3% to cover expected inflationary operating costs. Metro was able to cover the inflationary operating cost growth with a $5.7 million budget efficiencies, lower gas prices, and higher regional sales tax receipts. The agency is now planning for a modest 2% net increase in fare revenue instead of the 5% of the total of $6.5 million. Metro has a huge capital need of $11.7 billion over the next decade to achieve and maintain the state of good repair. The $185.7 million capital budget will fund those projects that represent the bare minimum investment. It can keep our system in a state of good repair, reliable, and being able to operate efficiently and keep the modernization program moving forward. Metro's proposed operating budget covers the day-to-day cost of running the railroad. In 2016, it'll increase by $15.1 million, or 2% compared to the 2015 budget, from $744.7 to $759.8 million. Historically, Metro's operating costs have increased on an average of 3% per year. In 2016, Metro expects to increase of $19.6 million in state sales tax revenue, assuming no change in state funding policy. That's going to be a very key component, as you asked before, of what this budget's actually going to be. That increase is partially offset by a $5.4 million reduction in other revenue and an expected $2.4 million reduction in fare revenue as riders switch to cars for lower fuel prices. That's what we're budgeting. We don't know that that's going to be the case, but we hope, in fact, that that's not the case, and we're doing everything we can to have that not happen. The net revenue increase is $11.8 million over last year. Fares paid by Metro customers normally fund operating budget through a small portion of it goes to capital improvements. We call that fare box to capital. Metro plans to allocate $15.6 million in fares to capital in 2016, $3.2 million more than last year. Since 1990, Metro's monthly and one-way fares have increased far less than our peer agencies. Metro's average monthly fares have increased by 83%, while as a group, Metro's peers have increased monthly fares by 142%. Even with this proposed increase, Metro's one-way and monthly fares remain the lowest of any of its peers in the railroad industry in the nation. Beginning in February 16, Metro's customers who bought one-way tickets will pay a quarter more per ticket. If these customers take the train 30 times a year, they will pay an additional $7.50 annually to ride Metro. Metro customers who buy 10 ride tickets will pay $1.75 more, 17 cents more per trip. If these customers ride the train to work about half of the time, they will pay $3.50 more per month, $42 more per year. Metro customers who buy monthly tickets will pay $2.50 more per month. Assuming that these customers use the monthly ticket for full-time work, that'll be about 12 cents more per day, about $30 a year. Other fare increases include an additional 75 cents on reduced fare, 10 ride, and a $1.25 reduced fare monthly ticket. As part of this year's budget process, Metro identified more than $500 million in capital needs for 2016 alone. We reduced the list of capital needs to meet the limited funding that we have. Some very tough decisions had been made in order for us to scale back the list to include the 2016 budget to be in compliance with the 2016 budget. As a result of funding constraints, many capital improvement projects have been identified to be deferred until 2017 and beyond. The level of investment will prevent Metro from achieving the state of good repair needs. We just don't have the funding to bring us into state of good repair that we need to do. We need more funding so we can continue to grow the system. For the first time in the agency's history, last year, Metro unveiled a $2.4 billion plan to modernize its rail fleet and pay for the federally mandated PTC project, as outlined in the graph above. It is the first long-range rolling stock plan in Metra history. In 2016, the budget funds a 2-year of the modernization plan, the second year actually, with those projects accounting for about 57% of the capital program. Today, Metra has the oldest fleet in the nation with the lowest cost per passenger mile. Metra has the best on-time performance record, month after month, with the lowest fares for passenger mile of any of the peer agencies, including New York, New Jersey, Boston, and Philadelphia. The 2016 budget includes $4.7 million in RTA Innovation Coordination and Enhancement, the ICE program, $2.5 million for the mobile app. This project includes, but is not limited to, the implementation and the launch and the improvement of the mobile app. $700,000 for a pilot project for a new test heaters that we're going to use at some of our stations. We're going to test it at the 123rd Street station, so the actual platform will be heated. We're going to see how that works and see the cost over the years, whether it's worthwhile to do that at more stations. It'll be $500,000 for software that uses train schedules to determine minimum amount of crews. That's going to help us comply with the FRA regulations. So in other words, this software will allow us to work with our crews, see if we can consolidate crews, we can use them better, and still comply with the FRA regulations for hours of service. And $1 million for a pilot project to guide the installation of Metra's automated passenger counting system, the APCs. That's going to be important because we believe we're going to get much more data from the new Ventra app, but it's not going to be solid data that we need to have for all of our trains, for everybody getting on a train and getting off the train. And since we have an open system, different from CTA and different from PACE, we really don't know at every station. We'd like to get that data so you can manage that data better. As you recall, last fall, Metra unveiled the $2.4 million modernization of its rail fleet and to pay for the federally mandated PTC program. The plan assumed $1.1 billion in funding from local, state, and federal sources, including Metra bonds and similar type financing. It also requires an additional $1.3 billion over the $1.1 billion, what we need to and expect to receive from our other state and federal funding partners. We have not yet identified any additional funding. Also, some $400 million that we were expecting from the state is currently on hold. Due to the uncertain market conditions and undefined funding sources, Metra made the responsible decision not to pursue its financing for 2015. If you recall, last year when we unveiled the 10-year program, we were going to bond $100 million in 15, 17, 19, and 22, and the other $700 was going to come out of our 5307 and 53 money. We hadn't done that yet because right now we're on hold in a lot of projects, and we didn't want to do the bonding yet until we had a good funding source to pay for it. So hopefully when the state gets together and everyone works together, we can make that happen. Congress has mandated that all railroads implement positive train control. The original deadline was the end of the year, but working with Congress, especially Representatives Lipinski, Quigley, and Dole from Illinois, and the support of the RTA, the support of other groups like APTA and the AAR, and many other congressmen from other areas and senators, we were able to move that deadline back to the end of 2018 with 2 one-year extensions based on being able to validate the system and certify it. That was huge for Metra because we all knew out of the 2008 Rail Safety Act that it was going to be unable to be achieved by 15. In 2012, there was several pieces of documentation that were submitted that said they wanted to move it back, and that wasn't done at that time. It wasn't until last month we actually worked together and got it moved. Otherwise, as of the first of the year, Metra would not have been able to comply with the law, and we wouldn't have been able to operate. The system is going to cost us between $350 and $400 million. That's the capital cost, and the operating cost will be approximately $20 million. That $20 million, we don't have a good feel for that since the system isn't developed yet and it's not running anywhere. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less, but that's going to pay for the system ongoing maintenance and operations. And we'll be able to adjust that in future budgets as we realize the true factors in it. Our rolling stock component of the modernization plan, we plan to purchase 367 new rail cars, rehab 455 cars, purchase 52 new locomotives, rehab 85 locomotives, and expand our 49th facility to rehab more cars. The reason that's important, right now our facility was built, I would say, in the 40s, and it really isn't conducive to the operation that we have out there today, and it's not as efficient as it should be. We want to do about a $20 million improvement so we can increase the throughput there and continue to rebuild more of our own rail cars and get them out in service faster. Here's what we've done so far in the modernization plan. By the end of the year, we expect to have rehabilitated 30 of the rail cars at our 49th Street shop, and 41 cars we're starting at, Bud cars that we're starting at our KYD facility, which is out around 115th Street on the electric district. We've also started upgrading 27 locomotives at our 49th Street facility. Those are the MP36s, the new European-style locomotives that you see out there. In February, the board approved $91.1 million contract with Progress Rail to rebuild 41 locomotives. The 2016 budget includes funding to start purchasing supplies for the renovation of 2 more groups of rail cars, the first 30 of the 302 Nippon Sharyo cars that we got in the 2000s, and 26 Metro Electric Highliner cars that we purchased in 2000. Those were our newest cars that we had on the electric district. We call them the HL1s, and to show you how time flies, it's hard to believe they're ready for midlife rebuild already. It's pretty amazing. 2016, we expect to design and upgrade a 49th Street shop, as I talked about earlier, to increase the throughput of the facility. One of the things we've done in an effort to boost ridership is, and we've made some schedule changes on the Rock Island. We did 2 things. With the ICE funding, we were able to start this year a pilot project on the Rock Island on the weekend service, Saturday and Sunday. Out of Joliet, it's 40 miles, but when you get to Blue Island, it's milepost 15, and every train used to go down to Beverly and stop every 4 blocks. What we were able to do with this ICE funding, we were able to take it and put additional crew on, add some cars, and when we get to Blue Island, everybody that's going down to Beverly now I got a separate train, and that train highballs. It doesn't make any more stops until it gets downtown. We were excited about that, and in the beginning we were picking up 400 riders a day. That had grown to 800 for the total weekend since we started that on the weekend. So people are really clamoring for that service. One of the other things that we've done is we've looked at what can we do to enhance our service and grow ridership. We can't continue to do the same thing and expect different results. I've said that time and time again, because you're just at the market. If gas prices are high, you get riders. If they're low, you get less riders, and there's a lot of other factors in it. So what we did on Monday, we initiated a new express service on the Rock Island, where we had a situation of overcrowding on the trains. We have our 457 train now, which is train number 413. It makes 1 stop at 35th Street, and the next stop that it makes is Tinley Park, 80th Avenue. It's a 33-minute ride in rush hour out to Tinley Park, 80th Avenue. That train normally had around 900 people. The first day that we operated the train, we split the train. We had 809 people and 467 people on the train behind it. So we're going to monitor that very well. The problem we had with yesterday, we were a little bit late, so we picked up some extra ridership, so we didn't want to count that day. But we're looking at innovative ideas and ways to build ridership rather than just wait and hope that they come. So that's some of the things that we're doing with the finance there. Another thing we're doing to boost ridership is take a whole new look at our marketing efforts. We brought on a new Chief External Affairs Officer that's looking at our marketing programs and everything that we're doing. We're analyzing some RFPs right now with a marketing firm. Our goal is to get 20,000 more riders on our trains. So we know we have the riders that are on the trains. We want to really poll who's not on our trains and why are you not on our trains and what can we do to get you on our trains. So that's some of the things that we're going to be working on in 2016 to boost ridership. We feel if we get 5,000 riders, that's around $7 million a year, depending on the zone and the type of ticket and things like that. So that's what we're really trying to do. We've got capacity on some of the trains. We're trying to get the capacity, filled up. So those are some of the things that we're doing. We just launched a mobile app. I can't tell you how happy I am about the mobile app. It was wonderful. The response from our customers has been overwhelmingly positive. It now brings Metra into the Ventra fold. It brings us, Metra personally, into the 21st century. People are just loving it. They're actually getting on the train, downloading their ticket, and showing the conductor right there. It's really amazing. Through the end of the December 1st, we had 36,000 Metra tickets sold. I just can't tell you, it's over 10%, I think it was, where's Tom at? On the first day, much higher than what we had thought. And we're expecting that to go, to continue in that direction. That's really all I have.
Well, Don, you've presented a great budget and a lot of good information on the new ideas and things that you're implementing at Metra. So it's really great to have you heading up Metra and have the staff that you have. And we certainly want to thank you and your board for submitting your budget within the guidelines that this board had established. And just a couple of quick questions I have. One you heard me ask the other service board. Do you have collective bargaining agreements that are coming up this year? And if so, have you considered that within your budget?
Yes, we have considered that within our budget. And to say they're coming up this year, we have some collective bargaining agreements that have not been settled yet that are still migrated into this year. Most of our collective bargaining agreements are settled. I think we got like a half a dozen, all of our big ones. We have 17 collective bargaining agreements with 4 different unions. It's pretty challenging, but we have that all figured into our budget.
The positive train control costs are just amazing to me. I mean, that's a massive amount that you're confronted with having to allocate capital dollars toward that. We didn't hear that, of course, from PACE because they're not subject to it. It's a lot of money, but other than the safety benefits that provides, would this be something that a lot of that money would have been used anyway to upgrade switches so that when you're making changes for positive train control that we're actually expending funds that we would have in the future anyway to some extent, or is this 100% add-on cost of an unfunded mandate?
We would have always done switches and things. This is a separate cost, separate and above. The issue that we have is we've got X amount of federal and state dollars in our capital program. This competes with us, replacing bridges and doing all kinds of other things. It's an important project, and there's no question about it, and we need to do it. My hopes and desires would have been, and when there's an important thing like this for the safety of the railroads across the nation, it would have come with some funding.
Yes.
It didn't. So that's why we were really working hard with our congressional partners, our state partners, to work with congressional partners to push this back and also try to get some funding. I understand under the new surface transportation bill in 17, I believe it's $199 million that the railroads can compete for. I think Metro would stand a good chance of getting some portion of that, but this is across the nation, all the commuter railroads. Just as a little bit of a history, the commuter railroads are spending about $3.5 billion across the nation on positive train control, and then you're going to have the OPEX cost, the operating and maintenance cost after that. It's no cheap endeavor, and is it going to be something good? Is it going to be helpful in the future? Absolutely, but like anything else, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost a lot of money to maintain. I hope I answered your question.
You did, and it stands out in your budget as the third largest capital allocation you have. I mean, which is incredible. For something that wasn't on the horizon a number of years ago, to all of a sudden it's at the forefront and must be funded. And so you're dealing with it as you have to, but it is a major impact on you, I'm sure. The last question I have is on the budget as presented. We no longer, as I mentioned at the earlier meeting, are going to maintain our 5% reserve policy as a board, and we're doing that with the understanding that the service boards are going to be maintaining the ability to pick up shortfalls if they occur. The budget that you have presented today, do you provide a way of providing for shortfalls should they arise?
Well, when you say shortfalls, that really, you can look at it, how big is a shortfall? If it's a small shortfall, we can weather the storm a little bit. If it's a very large shortfall, our board would have to make some critical decisions quickly on what we do. There's only a few ways that we have to control cost. It's either cut services or increase fares. We've gone past several years where we've actually increased our fares. And what we're trying to do is look at it on an annual basis and have small increases rather than wait for 5 years and have an increase that puts you, really affects a lot of people negatively at a higher level. So to answer your question, if it's a small, short period, we may be able to do things. If it's a total, we're losing half of our funding, no, we've got to look at something different.
Well, and the main answer that you've given us is that your board would be the one that would be looking at that, and you're aware of the fact you'd have to deal with it at your level the best you can.
We would have to deal with it at our level the best we could, and naturally we'd come to the RTA and, we'd see. When you get into a problem, we're all together, the RTA, CTA, PACE, Metro, we're all together, and we've got to figure out what would be the best solution to do. But we would have to look at it at that time, and we would present things to our board that they would have to look at and say this is the way we should go or not.
Thank you. And you mentioned one topic of raising fares and the fact that you've done it. I really think you've done the right thing in raising fares. One of the worst things we can do is get into a situation that Metro was in before, where fares had not been raised for a long time, and we had to make such a large increase. We're much better off raising them as we go along, as long as we're maintaining our expenses the way we should. If the cost is there, we ought to be adjusting our fares. So I'm glad to see that Metro is on a plan to keep your fares fairly consistent with what needs to be done and not letting it accumulate to a big amount. Are there questions of, yes, Director Colson?
Yeah, let me ask you about the borrowing too. The state of good repair bonds is $100 million, and it's going to be paid for basically out of the fare box. Is that right, out of this fare increases?
Yes, that was where we're covering.
Okay, and what is the timeline? It's not in the 2016 budget, I noticed.
Well, what we did it was never programmed for 2016. We were going to do $100 million in 15, 17, 19, and 22. We didn't do it in 15 because I said the uncertainty in the state and the ability to pay back the funds. So we've got to look at that, but it was never programmed for the 16 budget. Now, we might do it in 16, but that will be the money that we were looking for in 15. We're hoping that someday downstate gets together and money starts to flow and we get a capital program and we can move ahead.
That's the only debt service obligation you're incurring on the horizon, is that right?
That is.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Donna is comforted by the fact that you have a contingency plan for the funding if the state does not come through. So I won't ask that question, but it's something we just have to look at the time that it occurs. I have two questions. One is you talked about the state of good repair and the fact that there may be some challenges in terms of being able to fund that as completely as you'd like. Does that have any implications on winter service? I know that's been one of the big issues is trying to maintain service in the winter. And if you can't do what you might like to do with respect to state of good repair, is that going to have implications for service?
For the winter service?
Yes.
Well, no. The state of good repair needs are not going to affect our winter service. Our switches, the things that will affect our winter service is just bad weather. We've done a lot in the last 2 years to make ourselves a little bit more robust and resilient. We put on additional switch heaters. We've done a lot of different things. We've rebuilt a lot of the door pockets in the cars and things that we're having. We've got cars that are 63 years old that are running around out there that shouldn't. They're not that they're not safe, but we ought to have a replacement program, and that's what we're trying to do. But as far as the state of good repair needs in winter service, we're going to be okay this winter, even with the state of good repair that we have out there.
Okay, thank you. My final question is on the topic of Wi-Fi. I know that PACE talked about implementing that. I know Amtrak and others. From a client experience perspective, I know a lot of riders are very interested in being able to do that as they take the Metro train. Is there a plan for the Wi-Fi installation, or is it a major cost that's really kind of holding back that particular asset?
let me give a little history on Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, we were asked by the state if we could provide Wi-Fi for no cost, a no-cost solution. The first go-around, we didn't have any responsive or responsible bidders that we felt would be able to do it. Then we went out with an RFP to, look at the system that we paid for. What would it take to do it? And that came back at a cost of $72 million. $72 million, we're buying locomotives and cars that are, and replacing some of the old stock. So then we went back out again with an RFP, and we looked at it, and that didn't pan out. Everybody says you can do it, it doesn't cost anything, and when you're dealing with railroads that you don't own, you're dealing with a lot of things, and it just wasn't in the cards. So what we're doing this year is we're putting Wi-Fi on, we're putting 11 units on, we have 11 different lines, and we're outfitting one car on each of the line, and we're going to see if we can kind of put something together that would suffice. But what we're really doing is looking at if it's financially feasible to do it, and what is the reliability. The worst thing in the world is to put something out there that fails and everybody's complaining about it. It doesn't do good for anybody. And quite honestly, more and more, if you go into a pay for Wi-Fi, most everybody on their cell phone's got a plan. So if they're going to pay $30, $40 for Wi-Fi, they're going to do it on their own phone. So we've got to look at the cost that we have and what really is justifiable and where we can go. So, but the program is out there. We're going to do it at the, right after the first of the year.
Just out of curiosity, I know Amtrak did do it. Is there any parallel between what Metro does and what Amtrak does?
No, and Amtrak only did it on a few cars. They don't have it on a lot of cars, and I know they've had issues. Everybody that we've looked at and talked to, there's, when you do it on a grand scale, we run 703 revenue trains a day, 753 regular trains, and all the places that we go, and my phone, I go certain spots on the expressway in Chicago, and I lose people every day. It's like, so. It's not the same. They had more of a brain car type thing where it was feeding. We were looking at each individual car having it and having wayside communications. We wanted to have a robust service because the first thing everybody wants to do is watch movies. They want to do all kinds of other things. And if you don't have a big pipe, it slows everything down, and then you start getting a negative impact on it. But after the results of what we're going to do at the beginning of the year, we'll be more than happy to share them with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
In your discussion about capital, you spoke mostly about your rolling stock. Can you talk a little bit about any track issues with slow zones still, and also what you might be doing with the renovation of any stations?
Sure. Right now, a lot of our station projects are put on hold because of the budget crisis. We've got $400 million that are still that we need from the state, that we're going to fund a lot of the projects. What we have done in this year, we've done a lot of work out of our operating side. We've taken money out of operating and spruced up a lot of the stations and made it much better. Homewood was the last one we just finished, which was great out there. The capital side for the track, we're looking at doing the third main on the UP, like 6 miles of third main track out there. Most of the issues that we have is the rolling stock, because that's what we identified. The board asked us to look at where we were at and prioritize it. Because at the time, with this current board, when we were talking about it, we kept on talking about a $9.9 billion shortfall. Well, now it's $11.7 billion shortfall. And they said, look, you're never going to get that kind of money. Let's prioritize what we absolutely have to have. And that's how we came up with the rolling stock first. The PTC was number one because it was a federal mandate, and then we went into the rolling stock. As far as the tracks, we don't have any real slow zones when you talk about slow zones. We're pretty aggressive in not having, other than the permanent speed restrictions that we have because of the design of curves and things, and you're never going to change that unless you change the whole configuration. But we don't have any slow zones out there that we have.
Other questions or comments? Director Buchanan?
Yeah, Don, I was going to ask you that question about our door packets, since I asked you that a couple of years ago, and glad to hear that that issue may be resolved along with the switching. Kudos to you for realizing that issue and hopefully we won't have a catastrophic event of 2-3 foot of snow, so.
I appreciate your comments, but I just want to assure everybody, we're doing everything we can. You know, Mother Nature is a wonderful thing, and you just keep on fighting until you go down, and that's what we do. And every year we make ourselves a little bit more resilient and a little bit more robust. But I don't want to leave here and have everybody think we're not going to have any delays. If we have a catastrophic snowstorm, that does happen. But we are much better prepared this year than we were 2 years ago, than we were last year. And the real other key to that is our communications with our customers is far better than it's ever been.
Other questions or comments? Director Hobson.
Yes, I wanted to echo something that Chairman McGallis had mentioned, and that was your price increases, doing a similar thing as we did for PACE, looking at cost per revenue, cost versus revenue per passenger trip. Looking at Metra shows a 4% growth in costs, but they also show 4% growth in revenue. So that's fantastic, and I want to compliment you on that. That's really great. Secondly, I was really pleased to see that you had a number of customer-related initiatives in your presentation. That's fantastic. I'm sure you're familiar with the customer satisfaction survey that was conducted. For my benefit, could you kind of tie some of those actions to some of the specific findings in that customer satisfaction survey?
Sure. Our customer satisfaction survey, the number one priority for our customers, let me just preface this. Safety is always our number one priority. And when you talk to our customers, it not necessarily is that way, because they assume, which they should, that we are doing everything to provide safe transportation, and we will never stop doing that. But the number one goal when people get on a Metro train, they want to arrive at their station on time. They're getting on a specific train on a specific day for a specific mission, whether it's to go to work, whether it's to see your children, visit somebody in the hospital, go to court, whatever it is. And that's our number one. So this is our 9th straight month that we are over 95%. We have a few lines that struggle because of the complexity of the line and the amount of situations that we have. But that is a compliment. Month after month, we're better than all of our peers in the industry. And again, I said we do that with the oldest fleet, lowest cost per passenger mile, least amount of mean failure between rides and things. So that's all huge. Our communication was another thing. We've done a lot of things on communication. We did customize your commute, where on the website you'd be able to go on there instead of getting line alerts. So if someone was riding, let's say, the BN, and you rode a train at 7:30 in the morning and 5 in the evening, all day long you'd get alerts about, delays that you had. Midnight, if there was a delay, you'd get an alert. And, we were driving people away from what we built. We changed that so you can have different pockets of time where you get the alerts so you know what's going on. We've done from our GPS center, we're able to communicate and talk to the trains. So as we're getting into certain situations, we can communicate with our customers. The mobile app was another great thing to increase communication. So those are the things that our customers want. They want a safe, efficient, on-time transportation. And we're also working with our collectors and our conductors on customer service. Our goal is customer service. Without our customers, we can all take our marbles and go home. Customer, and that's what we're really trying to enforce.
Well, that's great. I look forward to improved satisfaction ratings on the next survey when it comes around, and I'm very impressed by the number of actions that you're illustrating in your presentation today. And my final question relates to uncollected fares. I ride the Metra, and I've got a 10 ride ticket, and I've had on 2 different occasions a fare not being collected or my card not being punched, and I thought, okay, well, this is just an isolated incident. Well, then I have a family member that reports the same story, and then I talk to a coworker that has the same story. I see tweets coming over the internet with the same story, and all of a sudden I'm starting to think that, well, maybe this is a more widespread problem. And even if it's very small, even if it's 1%, that's potentially $3 million of uncollected revenue. and didn't know if there was a plan in place to address uncollected fares.
There is a plan in place, and evidently it isn't working as good as it should, but there is a plan in place. We have a group of people that go out and we ride trains specifically for that. We also have several people in our organization that ride different trains to make sure. When we do have an issue, what I ask you to do, if we ever have an issue, give me a call. We put what we call spotters out on the train, so they actually see what the revenue collection is. There are some times we have overcrowded trains. If you highball a stop and you got a bunch of people on there and the conductors can't get through, or you have a large event, sometimes that happens. It's not acceptable. We are doing everything we can to correct that, and we're only as strong as our weakest link, and we're working on that. So we want to make sure that we address it with every single conductor. It's important for us because it does two things. One, we definitely need the revenue. We talked about that. But it's the customer perception that we're not doing what we should be doing. And we don't want that. We can't go downstate and ask people for money and have faith and trust in us if we're not walking our talk. That's important to us. So I would encourage you, if you ever have any issues with that, please give me a call personally. We will get it addressed immediately.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Chairman Dillard.
Thank you. Don, following up, and again, all of you, Terry, great job. On the app, one of the ways, going to Director Hobson's question about missed fares, I would clearly on the byline and on your newsletters to riders, and I've watched the conductors, and I was pleased last night. I've smiled. Everyone around me, so 6 or 8 people around me had the app, which I was stunned how many people had it already. One of the things I think you want to train your riders on, especially if they're 10-ride riders, it will help Director Hobson's concern. But I watch some of us, and I even do it myself. You want to train us to, once the train starts rolling out of the station, or once you get on it, to download your ticket. So that even if your conductor happens to miss them, and I rode on a completely jammed standing room only train the day before Thanksgiving, and the conductors did not get everybody on the train because they couldn't physically walk through the train. But if you train us to turn it on right away, the ticket goes poof an hour later. So you will collect some of those fares. And as I watch, sometimes the conductors have to wait for, Mrs. Muck and Fuss to pull it up or whatever, if the conductor starts on that car. So, sometimes, and it goes to us, and it only happened to me once where I kind of panicked and go, oh, I'm having trouble. It was my phone. It wasn't the app. So you want to train us to immediately, when we're starting to roll, turn that baby on. And if it's a 10-ride rider, you're going to pick up some additional fares in those situations. The train I was on, where the conductor literally couldn't get through, I had my 10-ride on there, so, Metra, without having to come and punch my ticket, got my money. And also for the conductor's sake, so they don't have to stand there while somebody, fumbles around trying to download the app. And it does save a lot of time. I will tell you, this saves the conductor a great deal of time because they don't have to punch. So it is a massive improvement, and the way you rolled it out, I thought was great. One question, and maybe you don't have an answer yet because it's still early, but the Railroad Rehabilitation Improvement and Financing Program, there is money and freeing up of money that possibly wasn't there before that could be used for the revitalization of Union Station. Do you know yet, and maybe you haven't got through it, whether that significantly helps our ability to improve Union Station or not?
The mere fact that it's in the bill, that it's there, and once everything gets done, I believe it will allow us a vehicle to do that, because now that fits into that criteria. So it is there, and it looks like it may be something that is another tool to help us in the toolbox there.
And just a tip, for your purposes of lobbying state legislators, I'd remind them you had the second highest ridership recently in your history That mass transit is more important than ever, at least from the Metra and elevated train perspective. And I constantly remind, the suburban legislators, not only do you improve the downtowns through transit-oriented development and things like that, but your ridership is at its second highest level in history. And then last but not least, I was sitting here fumbling around the positive train control. I mean, Chairman McGallis, $4 billion federal mandate. It's typical, and they give you $199 million, for the entire nation to take care of it. So I'm for positive train control, but I can't help but smile when we get a $4 billion federal mandate and they give us $199 million. The math doesn't quite work. So, but keep up your great work. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can roll back just 1 second to talk about the first comment that you made about, training our riders and working with them so they become more familiar. We're looking at the possibility, when you make the pre-departure announcement, the automated pre-departure announcement, to have that be part of that system so everybody on every train, every line would hear the same thing once the train starts to move, and that way there is no confusion. So the best way to get masses of people to understand it is say the same thing on every line, every day, the same time, and do it that way. So we're looking at some of those things.
Yeah, I want to be one of Pavlov's dogs, so the minute that we start rolling the wheels of the train, I'm downloading my app. But it's fantastic, so thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for inviting us here today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, Don, before you leave, what's the greatest challenge you see in achieving the budget that you presented?
Well, the greatest challenge that we have in achieving it is to make sure that we have the state funding coming through like it is. The federal funding is pretty much there. It's locked in. We haven't had too much of a problem with that. It's the state funding that's coming through. But the challenge of the budget, because the budget's nowhere where it needs to be. 2 years ago, we had a $1.3 billion budget. Or I'm sorry, last year we had a $1.3 billion budget. This year we've got a $1.1 billion budget, and we're under $1 billion this year. And you got to look at it. What's going on here? And it's all the disinvestment in capital. That's the problem. We need to have more capital dollars. We need to be able to rebuild our system and our infrastructure. That's the biggest challenges that we have.
Great, thank you. Well, we really want to thank you for your time today and for presenting a really good budget. Thank you.
And now, last but not least, we will have President Carter and CFO Tom McCone.
Oh, there we go. So Tom McCone, acting CFO, and Yvonne Towers, budget director. Our President Carter sends his regrets. He got called away, wasn't able to make it this morning. So I'll walk you through our budget, and then happy to answer questions. I do want to start out though by thanking the RTA and their staff. They've been great to work with through this budget, as they were in the prior budgets. Both Bea and Leanne, they're a great team to work with, and also appreciate the board of the RTA passing the marks historically early this year, which enabled us to put our budgets together as well. So it was very, very helpful. So thank you. So some of the highlights of our budget. Our operating budget is $1.47 billion, and it's a balanced budget. It's the 5th straight year of structurally balanced budgets. It maintains service levels without raising fares, and it also continues the unprecedented investments in the modernization, and accelerates our investments in new vehicles and major infrastructure upgrades. We're capturing the benefits of efficiencies, and I'm going to walk you through some of those. We're reducing our management overhead to streamline operations, which is helping to capture some of those efficiencies. And our budget is balanced to the marks established by the RTA, and importantly, it doesn't depend on any additional public funding. We rely on the formulas that have been established since 1983 to balance our budget. I'm not going to go through everything on this chart. I just want to highlight it's a lot. Since 2011, under Mayor Emanuel, the CTA has embarked on a historic $5 billion investment into our system. A lot of the highlights are there. I'll look at 2015 and note that this year we opened a new rail station at Cermak McCormick Place on the Green Line. We finished delivery of over 700 new rail cars that are now active in the system. In 2016, we're continuing to invest now in our bus system with the Loop Link opening, and then also the reintroduction of express service on 2 of our busiest routes, and then the continued investments in our infrastructure with the Your New Blue project, the Red Purple modernization, along with the extension, and a lot of station work, most notably near here at the Quincy Loop Station, adding an elevator there, the IMD station on the Blue Line, and then also the Wabash station that you're seeing the renovation occurring right now. Some of the highlights in terms of our initiatives, and I know we'll talk a little bit about fuel in the Q&A session. So we're saving $13 million on fuel in 2016 with our fixed forward purchasing program. So we've moved from a hedging program where we hedge against heating oil to a fixed purchase to give certainty in our fuel costs and take advantage of some of the low prices that we saw recently. In 2015, we completed what was a multi-year overhaul of over 1,000 buses, so more than half of our fleet. Bumper to bumper, stripped them down to the frame, complete overhaul, something that CTA has not traditionally done with our buses. So these are like new buses that we have on our system. In addition, this year we've accepted 275 new buses from Nova. We're continuing with another 150 of those expected in 2016 and at the very start of 2016. And some highlights from that is we've seen a 53% improvement in our bus defect rate. Our average defects per vehicle are down to 0.49 per month versus 1.04 per month previously. So these vehicles, they improve the customer experience as well, which is a big point here about the investments we need to make in the system. In addition, they save money. So the overhauled buses save $2.6 million annually on materials and things like that. Another management initiative to highlight our Second Chance program. This provides opportunities for 265 individuals who are re-entering their communities. It's one of the largest programs in the nation. We've actually got a federal grant this year to further expand the program from our cleaning program into our mechanics program. It's a great way to improve the cleaning, enhance the system, and provide opportunities for residents. Our rail fleet age has dropped from an average of 28 years old to 16 years old. I mentioned the 700 new rail cars that have entered the system. This is one of the best and the newest fleets that the CTA has had in its recent history, and among the best in the country. The FTA has minimum guidelines of 25 years of age at which you should be retiring. So when our average fleet age was over 28 years old, you can just imagine how old those vehicles were. So these are investments that we have to make in the system and in our rail cars. We've seen a 27% improvement in our rail car defect rate and $3.1 million of annual savings as a result of these new vehicles. So these are investments that, again, they flow to the bottom line, they improve the customer experience. We've mentioned in the past our supply chain management system. So we outsource part of our supply chain to Napa. They own the parts. They share part of our warehouse with us. We don't purchase them until they take them off the shelf, which really helps us mitigate some of our risk of obsolescence. It also helps free up cash, so we have more cash on hand. It's not captured in inventory, which has allowed us to reduce our inventory levels by over $30 million. In addition, this year, 2015, we've upgraded 4,000 of our fixtures for energy efficiency, which allows us to take advantage of one of the programs run by the state, the Energy Efficiency Program, that we pay into, all consumers of electricity pay into, but the CTA historically had not tapped into the rebates available for that. And this year, we should get over $600,000 in rebates from that, in addition to the benefits of the energy efficiency of those projects. And we're expanding our partnerships to further utilize the system. And one example I'll call forward is the partnership we have with Northwestern University. They this fall are for their parking lots, their off-site parking, which is near the stadium up there. What they've done is they have asked us to provide rides to anybody showing an ID. We capture those. They reimburse us at the full fare rate, so $2 a customer. What this enabled them to do was to eliminate the shuttles that they were running. So they've saved money by doing that. We've consolidated the number of buses that are running through Evanston, and so we've had environmental benefits as well as a result of that. So that was just another way in which we looked at to expand our partnerships to make full use of the system. I'll highlight a couple of our performance measures that we look at and the RTA assists us with as well. You will have seen this in your comparative performance measures. But our bus and rail operations are very cost effective when we compare to our peers. Our expense per passenger mile is second to LA in terms of on the bus system, well below the peer average. Same with our rail operating expense per passenger mile. It's the best in the country. So we're always looking for ways to be more efficient, but you can rest assured that we're looking at our peers as well and seeing how we compare with our peers, and we do so very favorably. On the advertising and concession side, we've adopted some more aggressive strategies, especially around digital screens. So you're seeing more digital screens. Those have helped us add more than $5 million in annual revenue to advertising since 2011. One piece of that is we've installed 100 urban panels, and we continue to look for places to install urban panels, which these are screens that appear more at the street level, so that people on the sidewalk, not only do they see advertising, but they also see when the next train is coming and when the next bus is coming. So it's an enhancement to our customers as well, and it's an enhancement to our ridership. And then our concessions revenue has doubled its 2011 levels. So we've had sort of aggressively looking at ways in which we can get more concessionaires in our system as well. In terms of the customer experience, and I know we've had a lot of discussions about ridership, so I wanted to focus on the customer experience here and what we're doing to invest in improving the customer experience. The first thing to note is we're reinstalling or reinstituting the X routes on Ashland and Western. These two streets are 5% of our total bus ridership on two routes alone. They're number 1 and number 3 respectively in terms of all of our 128 routes for ridership. So these are key areas to invest. One of the things we noted in the customer survey is that there was a decrease in customer satisfaction on the bus side, so we wanted to address that and focus where we get the biggest bang for our buck, which is on these high ridership routes. In addition, you may have noticed the construction downtown for the Loop Link service that we'll be beginning shortly, and we're actually gonna reroute some of our routes to take advantage of those dedicated lanes. So you'll actually have more buses taking advantage of that corridor. It's going to reduce speeds. We know it's going to drop a couple minutes off of what is a relatively short trip in distance, not always in time, through that corridor. So it should be a very significant improvement to our customer experience. All rail stations have train tracker digital signs. Bus tracker displays have increased to 415, both at rail stations and at our bus shelters. We've created a network of over 23,000 cameras. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find another transit system that has as an extensive network of cameras on our platforms and our vehicles that the CTA does. What this has done has led to over a 25% reduction in crime on the system. And we know that we will get video if something happens on the CTA. We've had customer awareness campaigns launched in 2015. Our courtesy campaign, which was a completely in-house campaign, was actually recognized nationally. You may have seen some of the signs about sort of eating on the train, don't block the doors, those sorts of things, meant to provide a little bit of humor, but highlight some issues that we do hear as concerns from our customers. And recently we've launched the If It's Unwanted, It's Harassment to discourage street harassment and address that issue as well. We're installing lots of new public art displays throughout the system. We've got more than 60 works right now, and that's only going to increase over the next year. And again, we've added new local concessions at our rail stations. The Ventra app has had more than 100,000 downloads to date. In addition, we've had 25,000 new registered customers as a part of this as well, which is an important part of this as well. On the first day, we had 5,000 new Ventra accounts created, so this is a very good way of getting people into the Ventra system, getting registered users as a part of that system. So it's been very successful from our end as well. On the modernization side, just to give some numbers between our total fleet size, we have 1,500 rail cars, and like I said, we've just upgraded about half of those with those 700 new rail cars. The buses, 1,000 of them have completed their overhaul. We're looking to do an overhaul in the future. You'll see this in our capital program next year on our 60-foot buses. And we're always looking at, what are our next contracts that are out there. We have an additional procurement that has to take place near the end of the decade to replace those 1,000 buses that went through the overhaul, since buses have about a 14-year lifespan. Bus and train tracker signs. One thing we're focusing now is installing the bus tracker signs at the rail stations. Those are important transfer points. So in the lobby of a rail station, at street level, we're starting to put in those signs where more passengers are transferring to buses there, so they know when the next bus is coming. We've recently and are almost completed with the full upgrade of our subway system to 4G and 4G coverage. We've moved from a system that was 2G, 3G coverage, spotty at just the platforms, to an entirely 4G coverage system, not only at the platforms, but throughout the subway tunnels as well. So you have continuous coverage throughout the subway of 4G as you go through it. This is the largest system in North America that will have that extensive of an underground coverage. And importantly, it's a $32.5 million investment in the system that was entirely paid for by the 4 major wireless carriers in a deal that we were assisted with by the Chicago Infrastructure Trust. In addition, they're paying us $500,000 a year for rights to the system, and they take on all maintenance costs for it as well. So it's a good deal for the CTA and for our customers.
That's what Metro needs.
Efficient financing, some of the financings that happened in 2015. We refunded some of our capital grant receipts because it was a favorable market conditions to do so, added another $10 million to our capital program to take advantage of lower interest rates. In addition, we've been aggressive in pursuing what TIFIA funds. These are funds that you can get at the government rate, so you get the government's backing. So we got under 3% on the loan that we got for the Your New Blue project that we closed this year. In addition, it serves as a line of credit, so you don't have to issue the bonds and then sit on them and suffer from that negative arbitrage. You only draw them as you need them. So we've locked that in place. We've locked the $120 million we need for the project, but we're not paying any interest on it. So we don't pay interest on it until we actually start to draw the funds. So it's a very affordable way, and you can see it's going to save us, we estimate, $38 million compared to traditional sales tax bond financing. In 2016, we're planning on issuing $357 million in bonds, and part of this goes to further the Red Purple Modernization Project. That's a $2 billion project. We're looking for significant federal investment in that program, but the federal government also looks for local investment as well, and so we want to make sure that we're showing that. In addition, we've always planned, and we've had this in our programs, $145 million for our ongoing state of good repair projects. And then in our capital program for 2015 is our TIFIA financing for the rail cars. That's probably going to close in the first quarter of 2016, where we put that $255 million in place for our next rail car procurement, in which the 7000 series, we'd expect delivery to begin at the end of the decade for those cars. For the Innovation Coordination Enhancement funded projects, it's going to help pay for the Ashland and Western Express routes. I think that's a good investment to enhance the service for CTA customers. We're updating our data analytics around ridership, our origin destination model. We're improving facilities and vehicle maintenance. One thing I'll highlight there is a quick change oil system there, so we don't have to wait for the gravity drain system. You can vacuum the oil out of it, so it can speed up create more efficiencies in our maintenance program. So again, these are little things you look to do to sort of create those efficiencies within your system. And then additional just software and hardware enhancements, upgrading systems. I think Pace mentioned this with their Oracle system. We have older systems as well that we just need to upgrade, and they'll create efficiencies as we upgrade them and continue the support. And then looking at business continuity and disaster recovery enhancements to the control center, making sure that we have the appropriate redundancy that we need for our system there. On the ridership side, we've had 8 years of over 500 million rides total on the system. System ridership is up 0.7% in total through October, and then 0.5% year to date. We had record rail ridership in 2014. We have seen growth continue in 2015. So again, if that continues, we would set another record in 2015. The highest level since we began keeping records in 1961. So really good demand on the rail side. The O'Hare station is doing particularly well. We set a single-day record during the Chicago Marathon, and it's up 16% versus last year. So it's really strong demand at that station. Cermak McCormick Place and the Morgan stations. Morgan Lake Station is in the West Loop. Those are two of the most recent stations that we've opened. They're both on track, and they will provide over 1 million rides in 2015. So good investments in infill stations. Those are key parts of sort of the growing economy in Chicago, both on the West Loop and then just the south of the Loop near McCormick Place. So we see ridership demand there in these growing areas of the city. Bus ridership, is down a little bit. Similar to Pace, we're constantly looking at this. Part of what we're seeing is fewer free rides as we focus on reducing those fraudulent rides, and the RTA has been very helpful in making sure that program's protected. The price of gas is lower, so more people are driving. And then we've had a lot of street congestion and construction. So there's a lot of other infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, and so that's happening throughout the city, which is a good thing, but it does slow down the streets. And we have seen that where there are areas of more construction, there has been slightly less ridership as well. And then we have seen that there are national trends. We talked to Philadelphia, we talked to New York, we talked to other cities, and they say similar to us, we are seeing sort of a shift from bus to rail, and so we see a little bit of that as well. On the capital side, we have a $2.3 billion 5-year capital program. Some of the significant investments that you've seen in 2015 and continuing through 2016 are the Ravenswood Loop connector, track and structure, removing slow zones on the Brown Line, removing slow zones on the Purple Line Express tracks. That work is finished up just at the end of this year. The new rail cars, a $1.1 billion investment in those rail cars, along with the buses that we mentioned before, and then the Your New Blue Phase 2, the station work happening on the O'Hare branch, most notably adding an elevator at Addison Station, which fills in an accessibility gap that we have on the Blue Line. Looking forward, in 2016 and beyond, we're overhauling 258 of our rail cars, what we call the 3200 series, purchasing the base order of 400 of the 7000 series rail cars, overhauling 208 articulated hybrid buses, which are at 7-year life right now, so they need to go through their midlife overhaul. 125 new Nova buses will be arriving, and then looking for some additional non-revenue equipment. We have our rail locomotives are about 35 years old, so we certainly need to upgrade those as well. On the infrastructure side, moving from vehicles, on the Your New Blue, looking forward past the station work that's occurring in Phase 2, it's substation work next, making sure that we have enough power to support the demand the rising demand on the Blue Line, so upgrading our substations, East Lake and other substations we have. Phase 1 of the Red Purple Modernization Project, that's the $2 billion investment in starting to rebuild the Red Line North. Red Line Extension environmental planning, you're going to be hearing more about that at the start of 2016 as we do our public outreach on the Red Line Extension. Upgrading the signals on the Brown Line, and once you upgrade the track, the next thing to upgrade is the signals, to meet the demand and to make sure we have the capacity out there on the Brown Line. Investments, like I said, in the Quincy and the Illinois Medical District stations, adding entrances and an elevator at Quincy. Our State of Good Repair program, always looking at our rail yards and garages. These are often the things that, 100-year-old, 80 to 100-year-old facilities where you need continued investments to continue to maintain them at a state of good repair. And then major stations at Wilson, continuing that work on that transfer station at Wilson, and then the 95th Street, the terminal expansion and enhancement there. It's our largest bus terminal. It's our 5th largest rail terminal there, used not only by CTA but also by Pace, Greyhound, and others at 95th Street. So it's a major investment that continues on the south side. One thing to note, where do we see improvements for customers? Reducing slow zones. This is our slow zone trend over the past 3 years, and you can see it just continues to drop over time. We expect that to continue, but we know sort of from the customer standpoint, slow zones are a key area that we want to make sure that we maintain the speed of the system with. And we've seen that dramatic improvement going from 12.6% of the system to 8.6% over the past 12 months. And then again, you can see our investments are targeted to continue to reduce our slow zones. And here's just some pictures. Again, the 95th Street terminal, the busiest bus terminal in the system. Again, CTA, Pace, and others using this terminal, so that work continues. Red Purple Modernization, some of the station work shown here for Bryn Mawr, and then the Loop Link, which you can see this coming to life downtown as well. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Tom, for a very informative presentation. Just a couple of questions that I had at the beginning, of course, one is the collective bargaining process. What you anticipate this year, and have you provided for that in your budget?
Yeah, so our agreements expire at the end of this year. So we are entering now the negotiating phase with our agreements with 241 and 308, our two major unions. I expect that will take some time, some back and forth on it. We've allocated that in the budget, so we've anticipated that. But obviously, we're looking to work with our labor partners to achieve efficiencies, along with any other sort of concessions that we have to make as part of that. So that's a part of our message as well. In that, for whatever we want to gain in terms of concessions, you need to work with us to help achieve some efficiencies, looking at work rules and things like that.
One of the things that when Forrest Claypool was still there, that he worked a lot on with the other service boards through staffing and so forth was the whole concept of changing how we collect fares and the card system and so forth. Metro was able to benefit from that, and certainly PACE was for the leadership that CTA provided and the agreement to work with those other service boards. When you mentioned the 4G system that you've installed throughout your system, is that something that there's any leverage there for Metro maybe to be able to work with the CTA, with your vendor, to extend that type of program at a it seems like a very good arrangement that you have.
Yeah, we're pleased with it, and it's a great service for our customers. I think we're happy to talk to the consortium. It's a consortium of carriers. The lead on it was T-Mobile. They were the lead behind it. So we're happy to bring the infrastructure trust in, the lead and the carriers there, and talk about where the opportunities might be to expand that coverage to others like Metro and PACE.
Because I would think that would save Metro a lot of time, but also you've already got a document that seems to be working and so forth. Maybe that's something that Leanne, you can talk to Metro about. I'm sure they've considered that. Maybe they've done it.
Well, I think there's a little bit of a difference because this is cellular coverage, not Wi-Fi coverage. Right. And the private providers are incented to give good coverage underground in the subways because that forces us to use our data plan sooner.
Sure.
But yeah, I think we can continue that conversation with CTA, Metro, and us, and see if there's other opportunities to sort of expand and leverage, get more for our customers. I mean, I think we're all looking for efficiencies as well as better customer-facing improvements as well. So we'll do that.
Thank you. And as far as debt that the CTA has, right now, approximately, I believe it's 18% plus that's of capital dollars are being utilized to fund the bond debt. What do you think is the maximum debt level you should have drawing out of the capital program?
I think
percentage do we stop?
Yeah, I mean, when you get into capital, this is why the state capital program is so important. It's almost like a pay me now, pay me later situation. As we started replacing our rail cars, we were replacing rail cars that were over 40 years old, and those are incredibly expensive to maintain. The manufacturers are out of business. You have to manufacture the parts yourself. I mean, they break down more frequently. They're older vehicles, and a lot of them weren't accessible. So we look at it and we say, well, what's the ongoing cost of maintaining these vehicles as they get older if we don't make those investments? And so in a lot of times we're trading off the increased maintenance costs for what might be a bond payment. And we say, well, that's a better deal for our customers to say, hey, let's get new vehicles that are going to reduce our costs and provide better customer service rather than sort of keeping that off to the side and just doing more of a break-fix maintenance. So I think there's a lot of that calculation that we go into as we look at where we make investments and how we find the funds for those investments. And I'd point to the arrangement that we had, and we worked with the RTA on this, for the bus lease that we entered into in 2008. And that's an investment. Some of it uses our federal funds, some of it uses our operating funds. But we did that because we looked at what it was going to cost to keep those old buses in service and actually sort of the benefit of having the new buses and the savings we would get. And we split that cost between our operating budget and our capital budget to bring those buses in. And we work with the RTA to make sure that we could do that.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Director DeWitt.
Thank you. A couple quick questions, Tom. You suggest the O'Hare service coming out of the airport is up about 16%. Are you able to quantify How much of that is traveler traffic? How much of that might be commuter traffic using that stop as the next step in their journey downtown?
Yeah, we'd look at it by fare type. So we'd look at who's on a single ride ticket versus who might be on a 30-day pass or who might have a registered Ventra card. It's something we could look at and get back to you and say, okay, this is tickets. And I will say we have a lot of ticket sales there. And so we sell a lot of single ride tickets and a lot of one-day tickets out of the O'Hare station. So I would say the bulk of them are people coming, visitors coming in, which is what we anticipate.
And I'm only asking the question, the Bus on Shoulder program has been very successful on I-55. I think it's going to be equally successful on the I-90 route. Are you anticipating, or what type of thoughts is CTA having with regards to increased traffic at that station from the Bus on Shoulder program is going to bring down the road?
Yeah, I think it's a big reason why we have part of the reason why we have the Your New Blue project, right? I mean, we are upgrading the signal system, right? We've upgraded the tracks because we know we're seeing increased demand on the O'Hare branch of the Blue Line, and because of this corridor investment, because of all the other growth that we're seeing sort of at some of the near-in stations, we need to upgrade the power, we need to upgrade the signals as well to support this ridership growth, and we need to have the rail fleet there available to carry these customers. So that's the Your New Blue project, and especially the infrastructure, the signals behind that to make sure that we can carry that increased growth.
Can I just jump into, related to that, we're also working with the CTA, with PACE, the Village of Rosemont, and Cook County on station enhancement improvements, beyond parking, even station enhancement improvements, and the Park and Ride, Kiss and Ride redevelopment at that location to provide better connectivity and access to the Blue Line, to O'Hare, from PACE, from the I-90 corridor. That's sort of in the planning phases, but that's a project that we've kicked off.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Director Colson.
I got to tell you, I think the CTA does a great job, especially considering the huge ridership you have and the ancient infrastructure you deal with. And I got to tell you, the 1:30 express bus Saturday to Soldier Field, not only did it save me paying $54 for parking, but I could have a couple of beers at the game. And so I recommend that. We're going to Soldier Field, which is a terrible place to try to get to. The 1:30 express bus is fabulous, and your drivers were fabulous.
Good.
Yeah, well, this was Illinois Northwestern. Anyway, but I'm also concerned about all this debt, and maybe I'm reading the numbers wrong, but the way I read this, 31% of the capital budget for the next 5 years is going to go to debt service, and that reaches 40% in 2017 calendar year. And even the 2016 operating budget, as I read the numbers, under other expenses, most of that is also debt service, about 16% of the operating budget. And overall debt service is $8.7 billion, as I read the numbers, and that's 6 times your operating budget. I think it's fair to ask, is that sustainable over time? And I worry, is there a plan to meet future capital needs? Maybe you can't borrow anymore. At what point do you say no new debt, no new projects, and maybe increase revenues to deal with the debt issue? I mean, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so let's talk about our existing debt, and it does come in a couple of different forms. I mean, the largest single item we have for debt is our pension obligation bond. It's $156 million that we have to pay because we had to shore up our pension system, which is good because we shored up our pension system, but it puts $156 million in those other expenses. It's netted in there. You see it at about $120 million, but it's a $156 million debt payment that we have to make every year for our pension obligation bonds to take care of our retiree health care and also to shore up the pensions. It's in addition to the ongoing pension contributions that we have to make. So that we have to do, right? That bond will be done in 2040, but we have to make that payment because we had our commitment to our pensions. We have, in an annual basis, about $140 million comes out of our federal funds, and we did leverage those federal funds to pay for a lot of our capital investments. The last time that we issued Garvey bonds was in 2011, and we did so to take advantage of the last option on our rail cars, where we could buy the rail cars at about 1.1 or 1.2 million per car, which sounds like a lot, but it's a really good deal for a rail car. So we did that to take advantage of that pricing and to make sure that we had those funds there to pay for those cards. And we went to the RTA and we said, listen, we're going to exceed our 50% threshold on borrowing against our federal funds, and we raised it to 60% for this particular purpose, which I would say was a really good investment because we have to replace those rail cars. One way or another, we've got to get new rail cars on the system. And then, from our sales tax bonds, they're once they sort of get to their level in 2016, 2017, they'll be about $29 million a year, the ones that we passed in 2014, which I think is a manageable level given the total revenues that we have there. We have capacity. We maintain having senior debt capacity, but we are judicious, right? It's in terms of when and where we use our debt to make sure that it is on these investments that are going to reap dividends and provide savings for the other areas.
Doubting the good use and the need for these capital projects. I'm just concerned going forward into the future. How can you fund a future capital project?
Yeah, so I think it's another area where I would say it's look at our capital funds. We have a $2.3 billion program, but there's $0 in there from the state. And when we have a state capital bill, traditionally the CTA gets about $300 million a year. If you look at our bonding program and our bonding plans, we're trying to make up for some of the gap that's in there that is just these state funds not being there. So I would say that as additional funds come online, that's the first place that we look is the most expensive piece of our capital funding would be our bonds. So as the state program comes online, we'd say, how can we trade these off? How can we reduce our bonding and replace those with some state capital funds?
Member DeWitt.
Did you say 1.2 million per car for your rail?
On the option for the 5000 series.
Thank you.
Yeah.
1.2 per car.
Yeah, and that was on the option, like I said. So the 7000 series obviously will have a different price.
Yes, Chairman Dillard.
Suggestion. I think after the first of the year, Director Colson, and we should include Director McGallis and any other members that want to join in, I think we should just have a meeting with President Carter, as well as Terry Peterson, and we should talk about Director Colson's concerns, just so we have a better comfort level and anticipation. Hopefully, with my fingers crossed, of a state capital bill. We should anticipate what we can and cannot at the CTA use that money for. Real quick question: LA, their bus expenses are less. Is it weather that makes their expenses less?
And mileage, because they run much longer sort of highway routes. They can add up the miles very quickly, so they reduce their cost per mile. So that's it.
Where are Nova buses manufactured?
New York. It's a final assembly.
Thank you, and keep up. I am very impressed with where the CTA is going, not only under Forrest Claypool, but I thought Dorvell was a great hire by the mayor and the CTA, and the mayor has clearly, and he gets it, understood that the CTA is vital to economic development in the city of Chicago, and our ability, as he's told me many times, we have led the nation in the last 2 years in corporate relocations. And aside from talent and location, his ability to sell mass transit, especially with a millennial workforce, which will be half of us in the next few years, is critical. And as we know, I call them younger kids. They're not always kids, but rail is the attraction. It's the Thomas the Train generation. But the mayor effectively uses the CTA as a selling point for the city, and the economic development returns, if you just look at the Brown Line and other places, is astronomical. So keep up your great work. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes, Director Lewis.
Just a couple quick questions. Thomas, we heard from Pace this morning. I know there's a lot of parallels between some of the issues that Pace has and some of the issues that the CTA might have. So one of the things that was a point of differentiation was the fuel strategy. You basically use a forward hedge, and they did not. Could you talk a little bit more about the differences there?
Yeah, so we I wouldn't call it a hedge. I just call it a fixed price. We do a fixed price a procurement. So we've sort of altered our strategy from prior years. We part of it is the balance between budget certainty and being able to make sure that you can spend the dollars that you have, and then how much you want to float, and sort of take the market rate. So we, per board policy, have 80%. So 80% is what we look to do for future forward fixed pricing. And that's what we've entered into. Now, again, we look to take advantage of drops in price, and we've seen more than $1 drop versus what we've had this year. I think Pace purchases their fuel quarterly, and that's what the strategy that their board has adopted to do that. So, when things go down, on a quarterly basis, they take advantage of that. I think for our purposes, we like having some of the certainty around those fixed purchases, but we do now allow enough at the margins to take advantage going forward. That's that extra 20%. And I'm just talking about a revenue fleet. Our non-revenue fleet is not hedged. We don't do fixed purchasing on our non-revenue fleet.
Okay. All right. And then there was also some discussion about contract compliance in terms of looking at contracts, as I think there are a number of major contracts that the CTA would enter into for services provided, and there was a kind of an audit function that took place with respect to contract and contract compliance. Could you talk a little bit about whether or not there's a similar program in place with the CTA based on some of the size of the contracts that you would engage in?
So we have a lot of several layers of review of our contracts, and we work with RTA and their audit team constantly to go through the auditing, along with the FTA as well, because they're constantly looking at our contracts as well. The transparency portal that was mandated by legislation, that's going to contain a lot of our contracts as well. So that'll be provided through the RTA as well. So we are always reviewing both with the RTA and with the FTA sort of our contracts and our compliance, and we usually you get a sort of clean bill of health with some recommendations coming out of that.
Thank you.
Director Hobson.
Everybody has asked most of my questions in your presentation, which was very thorough and in-depth, answered a number of my questions as well, so thank you very much for that. I only have one remaining question, and that is the revenue growth versus the cost growth, showing that the cost growth is running at about 2.3% and revenue growth is only running at about 1%. So you're more than twice, your costs are exceeding your revenue growth by more than twice. What is the plan to deal with that, as we know that that's not a long-term sustainable plan?
Yeah, and similar to what Pace said. I mean, it's not atypical for transit to be in that situation, and we don't just look at our fare revenues. Obviously, we look at our other system-generated revenues, advertising, concessions, and others that would play into that, along with our public funding to make sure that we're in balance. And obviously, those years that you look at, we have our plan for 17 and 18 where we are in balance overall between revenues and expenses. But it does highlight the target that we go after year in terms of an efficiency basis, which is that we want to get 1% more efficient to help to close that gap between the two of them. And then fares are the last thing that we want to look at, because we want to make sure that we've done everything that we can to help bridge that gap before we would ever turn to something like fares.
Certainly, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure our riders appreciate that as well. So you talked about the 1% efficiency. I didn't, the report that we received didn't go into that kind of detail. Can you highlight some of the efficiencies that you're really pursuing?
Yeah, and it's a lot of little things that add up to that. So I would say, it goes back to the new vehicles, right? So those are the new vehicles are something where we're getting efficiencies in terms of our materials and in terms of sort of the manpower needed to continue to maintain those. Our cleaning programs are more efficient than they were before. Energy efficiency, right? That goes to the bottom line. We get those rebates back in. So it's a lot of the small things that go into it that add up to that 1% gain in efficiencies that we target.
Terrific. Thanks so much, and I really appreciate your focus on customer satisfaction in your presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? If not, Tom, the last question I have, of course, is what is the biggest challenge you see in being able to live with your budget as presented?
So I think we've talked about a few of the uncertainties we have, but I would highlight again the state capital funding piece of it. You have the own RTA report on the backlog to a state of good repair that we have. We like Metra and Pace. We have zeros in our capital budget from the state, and that's always been a significant portion of funding for our capital projects. So I think that's the one thing that I think we all need to look to, which is how do we get that regional capital funding in here to bring our system, up to or and approaching that state of good repair.
Okay, and you're aware of the fact that we no longer include the 5%
Yes.
contingency word language in our document, and that it's our understanding that your budget would be able to deal with shortfalls, and your board would have to deal with something as catastrophic. And of course, we would be working with any board, but bottom line, you're the front line go-to person for that.
Yeah, that's correct. I thought it was a productive process we went through with Bea and her team, and along with the consultants that the RTA called in as well to go through that with each of the service boards. It was very helpful for us, and we're in agreement with that policy.
Great. Well, thank you very much for a good presentation and for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions from staff on anything that we need to deal with today? I know as far as the RTA budget, we looked at that at the last meeting. It is included in the attachment of the document that we received today. I don't know if there's any questions on it. If not, we certainly have December 17th to resolve anything else. Leanne, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, I mean, just for you to hear the detailed presentations from the service boards today, you heard the RTA budget presentation at our last meeting.
Right.
And then look for final approval of the regional consolidated budget at the December 17 meeting.
Great. Well, thank everybody for attending today. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Member DeWitt, second by Director Lewis. Committee's adjourned. Thank you very much for attending. I almost went for that.